Hello, welcome to today's session. We're happy to have you with us for this Sustainable Building Week Electrification Day session, Decarb for a New Tomorrow. I am Connie Empress, Communications Manager here at New Buildings Institute. Before we begin, I have a couple of housekeeping things to tell you about. First, you are muted and we cannot hear you. This helps keep the background noise down so that everyone can better hear the speakers. I want to direct you to the dashboard that you should be able to see on the right-hand side of your screen. If you are having technical difficulties and cannot see the slides or hear our speakers, you can use the question pane in this dashboard to let us know, and we will help you as we go. We will take questions at the end of this presentation. Please ask questions in the same question pane. Please take a moment to answer the survey at the end of the webinar. If you are seeking AIA credits, this survey is where you will share your AIA number for credit submission. This session is being recorded. All registrants will receive an email Thursday with links to the recording and slides for this session. If you need a certificate of attendance for your records, it will also be a part of that follow-up. I will turn control over now to my colleague, Webley Bowles, Project Manager here at NBI and one of the organizers of Portland, Oregon's Sustainable Building Week. Webley, over to you.
Hi, my name is Webley. I'm one of the co-creators of Sustainable Building Week and also a New Buildings Institute employee. Happy to have your participation in the second week of the third annual Sustainable Building Week. If you've been to other SBW events, you know that our goal is to foster industry collaboration and to really deepen Portland's sustainability roots, which go pretty deep. As you've been able to see by all of the presenters that we've had last week and then this week as well. So this is a week of calendars. As I said, we're in our second week. Today is Tuesday, October 20th, also known as Electrification Day. We have 3 electrification events today, which is really exciting. And after today's event, we have 11 more events, so you're not missing anything by joining on the second week. I also want to say thank you to our great sponsors. We wouldn't be able to do Sustainable Building Week without our sponsors, including New Buildings Institute. These Portland organizations are really the backbone of what sustainability is in Portland. So if you see them around, just say thank you for all that they've done to make Portland the sustainable mecca that we are. I also want to recognize the collaborating organizations that SBW works with. There's many organizations that do events year-round. I encourage you to check out their events, not just these last 2 weeks, but going forward, because you'll continue to gain additional knowledge, take that back to your firms, and make your projects more sustainable. So thank you, enjoy the week, learn, discuss, chat in the conversation, share information, and please help us to keep Portland green. Ralph, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Webley, and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for this Decarb for a New Tomorrow. And we'll get started here with a presentation orienting us to the zero energy buildings market. And there we go. So our agenda for today, I'm joined by my colleagues, Kathy Higgins, who is our Director of Research, Alexi Miller, Associate Director, and Amruta Kanolkar, a project manager. And our topics today will be focusing on the Zero Energy Market Update, Grid Optimal Buildings Initiative, the Building Electrification Technology Roadmap, and Heat Pump Water Heaters, the Advanced Water Heating Initiative. And then we'll have time for questions and answers. So please do stick with us and let's get started. So for this kickoff, I just wanted to share some updates on zero energy buildings and some of the work that we've been doing. We've been actually researching and promoting zero energy buildings since about 2010, so a decade of work in this arena. And I think it's maybe at this point cliche to say there's never been more uncertainty in the building sector, and we don't really have a crystal ball to understand what the future holds. But I think what we'll see in the presentation today is that we have the opportunity to really create the future that we desire. So at New Buildings Institute, our mission is to push for better buildings that achieve zero energy, zero carbon, and beyond through our research, our policy work, developing design guidance, and market transformation activities. So you'll see that today. And so we hope you will join us in this transformation that's going on in the building industry today. And so, you know, we are all aware that we've got multiple different challenges and crises happening, and that you know, these are related and really kind of nested within each other. And you know, we have the broader climate crisis that we're facing and working to address. We have challenges of the building sector with the pandemic, COVID-19, and how we address occupying and living in our buildings, and how we design them for better health and safety. And then we have concerns about equity and social justice. And so we feel that these are all connected, and that we have some solutions that we can be talking about today. And then, of course, you know, this summer and this fall, the wildfires that raged across the West Coast, and especially in Oregon and our own community, are a new challenge for how we, you know, how we rebuild, how we reoccupy our communities, and how we build for a future together. So we'll talk about strategies that we've been working on. I wanted to start with this this report. This is a recently released update of a 2018 report by Rocky Mountain Institute, just really kind of setting the context about electrification and decarbonization, the subject of the sessions today, and recognizing that that electrification, in this case, the report is looking at space and water heating, is the viable pathway to deep decarbonization in buildings. And so I invite you to pick up that report and review it. And last year, also, a focus on not only electrification, but equitable electrification, and what is the process, and how do we work with our communities to really bring about an equitable approach to decarbonizing the building sector. And then also, Emerald Cities Collaborative has put together a project on building electrification equity, and really developing a framework and a pathway to achieving equitable electrification. So there's several organizations, these and others, that are really focused on this, and I encourage you to reach out to us if you want more information. So just an update, and if you have been following our work on zero energy buildings, and Alexi Miller, who's on this webinar, has really been leading this project, and Kathy Higgins, research director, focusing on the research and reporting on progress in zero energy buildings. And so you can see, since we started tracking and reporting in 2012, there's been a substantial growth in zero energy buildings. And so our count is nearing 700 at this point. And so we have been not only tracking, but also reporting and sharing our results with regional watch lists, with specific state reporting, and then national reporting. And so we just recently released our 2020 report, and there's also an associated webinar that you can find on our website that's been recorded and you can review. And so you can see the results, they're spread across the US and Canada. We've been tracking the US and Canadian markets, and you can see a fairly widespread distribution with kind of a concentration on the West Coast and the East Coast. And so you can actually dig in, and I'll talk about our database in just a moment. But the most important thing to be thinking about here is, we know that zero energy buildings are efficient buildings, first and foremost. So the first principle is efficiency first, and really focusing on reducing energy use before adding renewables to get to zero. And so you can see in our database and the data we have on these projects that zero energy verified projects, these are the ones that we have data or another organization has verified, use about 20,000 kilobtus, sorry, 20,000 BTUs per square foot per year, an EUI of 20, or energy use intensity of 20, and the emerging projects an EUI of 24. So we can use this data to think about how we design new projects or retrofits and set targets. And we have some resources for targeting EUI in projects as you move forward. So just a kind of a synopsis to say these buildings are in every climate zone in 46 states and the District of Columbia, 5 provinces in Canada. That they're not just individual buildings, but districts and portfolios. And there are projects in our data set that are going beyond energy to be thinking about zero carbon or carbon neutrality and really expanding that scope. And also thinking about decarbonization and the topic of this webinar, and grid integration, which we'll hear more about in subsequent sessions. We've also been now thinking about and working on the transition from zero energy to zero carbon, and these are not the same thing. And so there's been a lot of work underway, and we've actually Webley Bowles, who introduced this session, has been working on really cataloging the definitions and specifications and programs that are approaching zero carbon buildings. And so there's more than 15 different standards that are and definitions that are referencing zero carbon or carbon neutral buildings. And so that's really one of the things that is kind of coming up next and important for us to consider. And so when we think about zero carbon buildings or carbon neutral buildings, we think that a comprehensive approach is based on this concept or framework that we have called the 5 foundations of zero carbon building policy, which includes energy efficiency, renewable energy integration, integration with the grid and addition of storage and also electric vehicles, building electrification, and then embodied carbon and materials. So this is this comprehensive view of how we approach carbon neutrality in buildings and what the future holds. So we have gotten a lot of this information from our Getting to Zero database, and so we'll just talk a little bit about this, and hopefully most of you have seen this database and have used it. And so this is what it looks like when you get to the database. This is based on a Tableau backend, and so it's very searchable. It's an interactive data set that you can select, by emerging and verified, by the state or province and building types, et cetera, and get customized data. So encourage you to go to that link. And so for Oregon, we could see here that we have 26 emerging projects and 5 verified projects across the state, and you can dig in and find out more information about those projects. And we encourage you to go to this website. There are also downloadable PDFs of data sets and PowerPoint templates that you can use. So we encourage you to get access to those through our website and use them in your presentations that you might be making. And we also want to get data on projects you're working on. So if you're working on a project either that has a stated goal of getting to zero or has been completed and it's not in our database, please do add it to the registry. We also would like to invite you to our Getting to Zero forum, which is coming up in New York City next October, so just about a year from now. In the meantime, we have a lot of resources and we are providing a lot of information, either webinars, our newsletter, and blogs. And so we encourage you to participate in Getting to Zero now and join us in New York next year. We also have on our Getting to Zero website, we have our Getting to Zero resource hub with over 300 different templates and policies and resources that you can download for free and have access to. And you can see the different categories here: design and development, embodied carbon, codes and policy, resources for local governments, residential, and schools. We have a webinar coming up next Thursday. If you are looking for more information on technologies, please join us for that webinar. And also I encourage you to review our blog, and we have a recent blog, Improving Health and Resilience Through Better Building Design. Our Ray Fellow, Marissa Brown, has just recently submitted that, and so it's also an electrification focused blog. So with that, I think I will hand it off to Alexi, and thank you again for joining us. look forward to connecting with you soon.
Thank you, Ralph. Hi, I'm Alexi Miller, Associate Director at MBI. I'm going to talk for a bit about the Grid Optimal Buildings Initiative. Interesting stuff about building grid integration. So a couple of basic themes. The Grid Optimal Buildings Initiative is a 3-year-long open collaborative that we are leading in collaboration with USGBC. It has to do, of course, with building grid integration, and this is driven by the fact that there are big changes happening in how buildings and the electricity grid interact. The regulatory environment is changing, the market is changing, the mix on the grid is changing as we succeed in decarbonizing the electric grid. That has real implications for buildings. And the buildings industry, designers and others, need to start being aware of these trends and start incorporating strategies that allow buildings to play this game, to interact in an environmentally and economically sound way with the grid, so that they can maintain their building resiliency, keep all the services going that they need to do, and succeed in playing a role in decarbonizing the grid in general. When I say the grid, I mean the system that delivers electricity for the most part to our buildings. I don't know if you know this, but 75% of all the electricity generated in this country is used in buildings, and it's more than 80% during peak hours. So really, the grid is here to serve buildings. In the past, it used to be really a one-way street. Big central thermal power plants put the juice out, and it goes into offices, homes, and industry. We started to see some changes in which we saw some more distributed generation. That's encouraging, more wind, more solar, including on buildings. And when that gets to a high enough point, which isn't really all that terribly high, we start to see the need for a little bit more active grid management. Storage in buildings and at the community solar or utility scale can help solve this problem. But what we think is the optimal way to do this is for buildings and the grid to interact with each other to actively support this transition to a carbon-free energy system in general. We started thinking about grid optimal and building grid optimization because we've done a lot of work around zero energy buildings over the years. And one thing that some of our board members and others have pointed out, several years back is, hey, what if you succeed and we do get many thousands of zero energy buildings? What then for the grid? So this graphic here shows the same building. This is modeled by National Renewable Energy Lab, NREL. This is the same building achieving zero energy in two different ways. On the left is a building, sort of a baseline building with a whole lot of solar panels on the roof. And on the right is the same building with a focus on energy efficiency and demand shifting. The building on the left, I'm gonna use my mouse, I believe it can be tracked. This golden area is the building's load in the upper left. That's the energy usage throughout the day. The area under the curve is the energy usage. The solar comes on, as you can see, and peaks at noon and stops as the sun goes down. And so the blue graph below that is the net load that comes through the meter. It exports power during the peak of the day, during the, roughly around noon hours, and it demands power overnight and in the evenings. If that building now takes an efficiency first approach and does some load shifting, then we're able to not only reshape the load on that building to better match what the solar panels are putting out, but also we don't need nearly as many solar panels in the first place. And the impacts on the grid are much more manageable. Once you multiply this by thousands and thousands of buildings, the grid can do a lot better when all the buildings get to zero this way rather than the way on the left. So what we're trying to do is think about how buildings can change their operations to get to these kinds of goals. There are a couple different ways that you can get there. This is from the US Department of Energy. They call it shed, shift, shimmy, and shape. Basic energy efficiency helps, right? You can reduce loads, and that reduces loads through all hours, peak hours, and high carbon hours included. You can shed, like traditional DR programs, you might turn off lights for a while or cycle your HVAC, and you can shift maybe with energy storage to move the time of energy usage. This last one, modulate, is on very short time frames, and I don't think we're going to get into that today. from a building design perspective, what can designers and the buildings industry do, whether that's homes, commercial buildings, or institutional buildings? The key here is that it is becoming more and more important to start thinking about when buildings use energy, not just the annual totals. So here's a graph of that some designers have used to say, well, okay, over the entire year, when does it use energy and where do the peaks fall? That's a pretty complicated graph to wrap your head around. And so we've started doing some exploration of how can we boil this down a bit? What are the strategies you might be able to use to actually get there from here? This is from some research we did a year and change back as part of the Grid Optimal Buildings Initiative, where we said, okay, let's take some baseline buildings, and this one is a code compliant ASHRAE 90.1 2013 code compliant commercial building. This one's in San Francisco. In the summer afternoon, it peaks at 171 kilowatts, driven in large part by cooling. You can see it's mostly cooling, lighting, and plugs with a smattering of other loads in there. When we add in several strategies, and you can see them listed on the right there, several building grid integration strategies. These are all off-the-shelf technologies. It's nothing too crazy. Things that, for the most part, can be done in a building built to today's standards. You can see that we're able to shave something like 40% of the load during that peak hour. Not only that, we actually move it to about 11 a.m., which is a much easier time for the grid to serve. And in California, there's a lot of solar during the summer and at 11 a.m. So it tends to be a relatively clean hour on the grid. So what kinds of things can building designers or building stakeholders do to get to some of these outcomes? I think of there being four basic approaches. Permanent efficiency. Efficiency first. Still applies in building grid integration just as it does in zero energy and in general. Like I said a moment ago, if you reduce your load throughout the entire year, you reduce it during high carbon hours and peak hours. Well done. Peak shifting. Buildings can be designed in ways where they can move their building energy use. That could be done in a permanent and passive way. For example, west-facing shading. Very simple. You get a lower afternoon heat gain. That tends to reduce your energy load because you don't need as much cooling during peak hours, which tend to be summer afternoons. Buildings can respond dynamically by reducing their energy use based on some kind of a signal or a schedule, like a time of use rate. Say, okay, now it's time to pre-cool. We're gonna cool the building down a little bit, and we're gonna coast through that evening peak. And then finally, you can have dispatchable technologies and dispatchable energy storage, where you get a signal from the grid, and it says, okay, discharge the battery. Okay, charge the battery. Turn off the HVAC, whatever the case may be. So there's a scale of different approaches. We've done some digging and kind of tried to figure out what are some of the most relatively straightforward, off-the-shelf, and still impactful strategies that you might be able to put in your own building for building grid integration or optimization. And some of those shown here are things that we're confident will make a bit of a splash in improving the building's load shape in your building and in making the building more future-proofed. And I'll talk about what that means in a moment. So thermal and battery energy storage to the extent that that's possible, enhanced thermal mass, and actually in that same bullet should be envelope, right? Of course, permanent efficiency, just fundamental high performance building, very important. Grid integrated controls on mechanical systems to enable things like pre-cooling or preheating or extend set points during certain hours. Some kinds of west-facing shading and south-facing shading, that could be passive, that could be automated, and just simple stuff like point the solar panels west, not south, so that they better align with the time of peak. So I've mentioned carbon once or twice, and I wanted to talk about a bit about what I mean. This is a graph of California's carbon emissions. I think this was 2018. Of each 15-minute period over the entire year. And you can see pretty clearly that summer afternoons, the grid is dirtier, and spring and winter, late winter, all the way through the spring into early summer, the midday hours tend to be much cleaner. as a building, if you're able to maximize your use in those green times so that you can minimize your use in those gray times, then you have reduced the carbon impact of your building. What we did, we took a grid optimal pilot project, or we took an approach in our first grid optimal pilot project in Northern California in Santa Rosa. It was the Sonoma Clean Power headquarters. They're a community choice aggregator, like a county level municipal utility. We said, okay, I'm going to go back up one slide. Let's look at this. Here's the California grid that the building sits in. They're a utility and they procure their own power, but they know they're still connected to the broader California grid. So as a thought experiment, we said, okay, so let's say you're getting this power mix. Now let's layer your building's load shape on top of that and say, building load shape, kilowatt demand in any particular hour times the grid intensity, carbon per kilowatt, or kilowatt hour. For every hour of the year, we multiply it out and we get this marginal building carbon emission profile where we can see, okay, the building turns on about 6 a.m. During the night, there's very low carbon emissions because the building is hardly demanding any energy. We get ramp up in the winter. There's a bit of morning warm up. You can see it in January and February, kind of that morning gray and black zone over here. And then the other really significant time to pay attention to is summer afternoons and evenings from maybe 1 p.m. Up to about 5 p.m. where the building starts to have less occupancy. So that tells us very clearly, here are two basic things we should be thinking about: winter morning warm up and summer afternoon cooling time. That tells us some strategies we might be able to use in that particular building. This variability is growing. Here's I think this is Colorado's grid as it happens, but the story is similar in many grids across the country, including here in the Northwest. In 2020, yeah, there's some variability. By 2040, 2050, the patterns are very clear in a grid that is dominated by solar like this. In the Northwest, the story is actually even more interesting because we have hydro. So the seasonality of the hydro system adds a pretty fun wrinkle to explore. But the point is that the variability is growing. So buildings that are able to adjust their energy use in terms of when they use energy are not only going to have a lower carbon impact, they're going to be less exposed to the changes in cost, in time of use energy cost that are definitely coming with this. So very briefly, the Grid Optimal Buildings Initiative, we are on year 3 of a 3-year initiative. We've put out new metrics to define the quality of building grid interactions. We've done some research, some of which I've showed, done some pilot projects. We've got various blogs and white papers and webinars that detail the work we've done to date. And I think, does the next page have our, yes, here's our website for that. Right now, we're putting together utility program criteria, and we are in, so I suppose you'd call it the late stages of working with USGBC to get a lead pilot credit for grid harmonization that uses these grid optimal metrics approved. It's got preliminary approval and we're working through the process. So my hope is that inside of a month or 2, you should be able to get up to 3 lead points for building grid harmonization using this grid optimal approach. We are welcoming more pilot projects. So if you'd like to join us and are interested in exploring what a pilot project might look like, please let me know. Thank you.
Okay, next up is Kathy Higgins.
Good morning, my Northwest colleagues. I'm going to check if I have control of the slides. There, I think I do. Thanks for joining us this morning, and thanks to all of you, as Webley said, for your work continuing the efforts to decarbonize and improve the efficiencies in buildings in our region. I'm going to speak about the Building Electrification Technology Roadmap, and if you've ever seen a better title, no, it's really a compelling set of technologies that help electrify both homes and buildings. So let me tell you about it. There we go. As Alexi was just pointing out, we can't rely simply on a green grid when we've got enormous amounts of fossil fuels being used directly in buildings. On average, homes range from 30 to 70% of their energy use being fueled by fossil fuels because of the predominance of gas water heating and gas furnaces. Commercial buildings range on a low from 10% up to a high of 70%, but depending upon the type of commercial building. A restaurant's very gas dominated due to the kitchen situations of commercial cooking. Hospitals also, if you've got a boiler in a large commercial high rise of multifamily, down to smaller uses in offices and other types of buildings. So the range of gas use in buildings is quite large, but the technologies we're going to talk about have some commonalities. This project is started in California, but we may be doing some modifications to bring it to other regions, but these were the funders that started the idea to say, please work with us on what are the technologies that displace current incumbent gas technologies. So there are a lot of electric technologies, of course, but I'll show you how it's simply those that replace fossil fuel technologies for the purpose of improved efficiency on the technology and decarbonization. So what this better building electrification technology roadmap should tell us in a snapshot is, what is the technical status of the product now? Where is it headed on the road to adoption? And what can we do to overcome barriers to adoption? So the audience is efficiency programs and governments, but the activities that are needed to overcome some of the barriers are widespread across manufacturers, they're across pilot programs, they're at the midstream and supply stream, and we address those activities that can be spurred and implemented through efficiency programs. So, and the reason, of course, driving this, needless to say, is the climate policies. And we just know that buildings have a large impact on emissions, as shown here. Again, this is a California audience for this building. This would be customized in a different region. But 26% of Californians' emissions come from the construction and the operations of buildings. And so in looking at this policy that California has to be carbon neutral in 2050, 70% of buildings need to be electrified by 2045 to meet that goal. And 2030 is right up the road in a decade from now. And that's 30% of buildings, all buildings, not just new construction where we can address them by policies, but existing buildings. In our Northwest hour, in our Northwest region where I lived my entire life, our power isn't as green as we think it is. This is from the Portland Climate Action Plan. And you see that even here in the Northwest where we're hydro dominant, if you live in the city, you have a lot of fossil fuel based sources because of Pacific Corp's fuel mix. So we've got to work at the building level and work at the generation side. So within the better analysis that Alexi Miller is my colleague working on this, we have 38 different measures across 4 end uses. And the end uses are the 4 dominant areas within a building that use fossil fuel technologies of space heating, water heating, laundry, and cooking. So we have addressed these technologies that could replace a gas incumbent, identified only high efficiency solutions, ideally, that would have an improvement to the owner and the occupant in terms of their operating characteristics and their energy use. We looked at both new construction and retrofit, and we addressed 5 sectors from higher ed through large and small commercial, multifamily, and single family. And I'm going to give you a snapshot of just one for a moment, because the report, which is due out at the end of the year, is much more detailed. But we characterize these technologies on 5 parameters. How ready is it? Can you go? Is it ready, technically ready to deploy now? Is it available? Can you go and get it? Because we have a section in the study that also addresses international products, where we know Europe is ahead of us in terms of application of all electric technologies, but they're not all here. So where is the availability status of the technology? How easy is it for application? That's a kind of an inverse of, are there a lot of site barriers, so that all the scores, as we scored these, would be positive if there were no barriers, few to no barriers. And do we have awareness? The fourth parameter here on the upper right is the market aware of the technology. And then how strong are the greenhouse gas reductions relative to other electrification technologies? Every one of these has a high greenhouse gas reduction potential compared to the incumbent, because the incumbent is a gas technology and you're going to reduce emissions at the site and source by eliminating gas at the building. But this is relative to other alternatives that could go in place of the technology. So here's a roll up of the space heating results. And what I've done is done a call out up here of 2 of those 5 that I just introduced you to, which is readiness and product availability. Here you see that there. And high, moderate, low. Those are those scores that we talked about. So you've got over on the left, you see the water heating, space heating, cooking, and laundry end uses and the technologies. And for space heating, what we want to do is give a quick at a glance which ones are ready to go today. You can get them, they're widely available, and they're fully technically ready. And those would be the 2 columns here being fully green. And then as you move down, you see some different scores relative to whether there's barriers in the field or whether there's as high or low of greenhouse gas emission reductions. So the takeaway in a snapshot is that for space heating, as well as if I were showing you water heating, is that heat pumps are clearly the prominent technology in the space and water heating end uses that are going to meet the criterion of low greenhouse gas impacts in terms of their technology, and of high efficiency, because they've got, let me move ahead here, they've got technologies that replace gas at an efficiency that's 2 to 5 times the efficiency of the existing item. So we put those not only at the end use level in looking at how to electrify at the end use, but also in packages. Single family homes on the left, multifamily homes on the right. What are the baseline equipment here in the gray for those 4 end uses? And what are some graduated ways to get to best practices? And we really want to recognize that in our history, many of you I'm sure have had a long history in energy efficiency. We want to be sure that when we are advocating for designing and implementing a transition to an all-electric future, that we are using technologies that are reliable, efficient, and that are not going to have problems like these 2 right here that are crossed out on. Because if we introduce a cooking solution, probably the most emotional appliance replacement that we're going to deal with in an all-electric building is the stove, as you all know, the stovetop. And Glass Radiant is going to give us nothing but bad feedback. And if people switch to an all-electric solution that isn't satisfying, then we're going to be stepping back to it just doesn't work. So be sure to know your technologies and think about the end user's experience, and that induction in the example of cooking is going to give a much more positive reaction, as we've heard from a number of leading chefs around the world that have already gone all electric in their kitchens with induction. So again, the heat pumps really bring the solution. There's a diagram on the left showing the improved efficiency over standards in the country, up to the highest efficiency units in Japan. We've got a lot of heat pumps that are in the COP range of coefficient of performance range of 3 to 5, which will help when you electrify a building, make sure that the fuel difference in price between gas and electric is equalized out or improved due to the efficiency of the technology. Sunday, if any of you listened to NPR, there was Morning Edition this last Sunday. And I want to take that heat pump theme and say, as I mentioned earlier, that existing buildings is really critical. And here in Portland area, we can have this kind of arc of progress with our colleagues, as Ralph works quite a bit, and our other team members do with NYSERDA in New York. And the work going on in the Northeast and the work going on the West Coast, we're really the arc across the U.S. And this gentleman here, Donnell Baird, he has a model, that's what I want to say, is what a model he has created to look at retrofitting buildings driven by heat pumps, but also driven by climate agenda. So he combines a retrofit opportunity where he takes over the management of the heating system, gets a net positive income for the owner and a profitability margin for himself, combined with solar panels, but it's all led by the heat pump retrofit of the boiler. So if you've got 5 minutes, there's a great article on NBR about this model, and I'd love to see this more of these types of models. So it's not just looking at technologies or the design part. We need to look at models to apply those technologies. Because when we do, we get efficiency results like this in terms of what those technologies can do. The carbon and energy reductions in this example are really compelling. And I know we get similar stuff because of the statistics I just showed you in terms of the grid in Portland area too, so that if you took those packages I showed you and applied the medium efficiency package, you'd have 50% energy reduction and 80% emission reduction. If you were in Sacramento, these are always very site specific based on your fuel mix, as Alexi was also referring to. And then if you did the all electric high efficiency, 64% energy reduction, 85% emission reductions. And one takeaway from this is that we don't need to wait for the very, very best technologies that may be still in the pipeline in terms of the refrigerants or other changes. We need to get out there with what we have in hand, all those items that were fully solid green and are ready to go. We need to be putting those in yesterday. And this is just a roll up of the types of savings. All of them are 50% or more in energy, and the emissions are all 75% or greater across 4 different climate zones in California. So when you look at solutions, I'm going to pull this up too. In our Better Roadmap, we break it down by the 4 end uses, but we also roll up to 5 shared strategies to remove roadblocks and recommendations. That's what the R&R refers to. That has to do with building demand, creating a compelling value, getting that supply chain to make the business case, partnering with production, which is the partnership with manufacturers, closing the cost gap, and aligning programs and policies. Those are the 5 key strategies across a market transformation approach to move the market into all electric technologies. So I thank you, my Portland colleagues, and I pass the controls back to my next colleague, Amruta, who'll speak about one particular technology at a very deeper level.
Thank you all. Just making sure that I have controls. Okay. All right. Good morning, everyone. I'm Amruta Khanalkar, Project Manager here at New Buildings Institute. And I will be diving deeper into water heating side of things today, talking about some emerging technologies that are in the market and the new ones that are coming in, and finally introducing the Advanced Water Heating Initiative. Here we go. So what you see here on this slide is a household site energy consumption by energy source for different regions in the United States. And the last row is the West Coast scenario. So for example, in a typical household in Northwest, the share of electric versus natural gas is almost 50%. But as it gets colder, so for example, in Northeast, the second row from top, as it gets colder, the natural gas consumption goes up, natural gas and oil or propane. So in Northeast, the carbon intensive fuel sources are responsible for 70% of their fuel mix. Next slide, I am going to show you. So what you see on this slide is the carbon dioxide emissions by end use for commercial and residential sectors. And space heating and water heating, like they are heavy natural gas users. So just these 2 end uses together like consume more than 50% of the carbon emissions between commercial and residential sector. So it is critical that these 2 end uses are, like, from decarbonization perspective, these 2 end uses are that are tackled well. And then on the next slide, I'm gonna. So even in E3's report, they have shown that as the grid gets cleaner, the greenhouse gas emission reductions are pretty imminent. So for example, what you see in the first in 2020, for example, once all fuel household moves from natural gas or propane to all electric, there is close to 50% of CO2 emission, like greenhouse gas emission reduction. And by 2050, as the grid gets cleaner, that reduction goes close to 80%, just from going from mixed fuel to all electric homes. So from this slide onwards, I will be diving deeper into water heating technologies and heat pump water heaters in particular. So what you see here is how heat pump water heaters have evolved in the last few years. So from 2013 to 2019, there are it started with 4 manufacturers in this market, and now there are 14 plus manufacturers. The technology is evolving. So NEA has this advanced water heating specifications. Started with tier 1, now they are at tier 4. So with the UEF, Unified Energy Factor, of 2.7 to 3.5. So this technology is in. This technology is here for decades now, and it's evolving pretty quickly. Oops. So in the residential sector, what you see on the right are the different manufacturers. So there is Sandon, GE, Rheem, A.O. Smith, Bradford White. There are many manufacturers manufacturing residential units, unitary heat pump water heaters for different gallons, voltages. So what you see under GE is in fact coming out with their new products, which is 120 volt heat pump water heaters. Typically, most of the water heaters that are so right now, the water heaters that are in the market are 240 volt heat pump water heaters. But for retrofit scenarios, so gas and propane replacements, if somebody wants to switch to a water heater without upgrading their panels, then GE is coming up with a new solution, which is 220 volt heat pump water heater, their GeoSpring. There is also Sandon's heat pump water heater, which is the only product right now in the market that uses low global warming potential refrigerant, that is the CO2 refrigerant, and that's why they can go down to minus 20 to 20 degree Fahrenheit on their operation. So what you see on the left are the technologies that are either in the market right now or emerging. So the unitary 240 volt, the conventional refrigerant, these are all these technologies that are currently in the market. Sandon has this low GWP product. And then, as I mentioned, GE and Rheem and more manufacturers are coming up with this unitary 120 volt conventional refrigerant heat pump water heater, which will be solving panel upgrade issues and helping with gas and propane replacements. And these are the new products that we will see in the market coming in. That is the unitary 240 volt low GWP and unitary 120 volt low GWP heat pump water heater. Similarly, this slide shows you multifamily and small commercial, like the heat pump water heaters, that the central heat pump water heating solutions. Central right now, the central heat pump water heaters, typically they are taking these large unitary systems and designing them in series or parallel in order to solve. Oops. In order to solve central, to take care of central's high demand and load. And they currently have this conventional refrigerant 208 volt heat pump water heater in market. There is also the Central's Mitsubishi 208 volt low GWP unit in the market, which is in fact getting field tested now through an EPIC project in California. And finally, a custom package. So through the Advanced Water Heating Initiative, which I will be introducing in few slides, we are also working on working with BP and Ecotope. BP and Ecotope is leading this effort to so right now, if you think about custom, it is all about taking this unique design criteria and designing this system with a custom effort. Like you need individual unique design for each building, but what BPA and Ecotope is doing, they're working on a packaged like widget-like system design, where these will come factory installed on a skid, and they just need to be installed in a mechanical room with this on the skid, so that the whole purpose of the goal is seeing more market adoption and market demand for these systems. So that's about multifamily and small commercial heat pump water heaters, emerging technologies that are in the market or coming in. So heat pump water heaters are not just 2 to 4 times efficient compared to a conventional efficiency water heater, but they also can act as a thermal energy battery. So a smart heat pump water heater can preheat water when the grid is clean and store it in tanks for use later. And because of their load shifting ability, they can contribute significantly in greenhouse gas pollution reduction efforts. And they can do that by shifting energy consumption to times when the carbon impacts of energy production on the grid are low. So they are shedding when typically the carbon impacts are high, and shifting it to times when so they're preheating the water and storing it in the storage tanks for use for later use. So they basically act like a clean energy battery for the grid. What you see on this screen is the heat pump water heater load profile and electric resistance water heater load profile laid on California's marginal emissions daily profile. And so the one in brown is heat pump water heaters, and the one in green is the electric resistance. You can totally see heat pump water heaters are consuming almost half of the energy, the emissions, and they're also preheating the water. So they have this ability to shed and preheat when the grid is comparatively clean. We are also doing this analysis internally, which looks at all the different water heating technologies that are there in the market right now, gas and electric technology. So electric resistance, a gas tank, non-condensing, condensing tankless, and we have also added a gas tank tankless. So and we are comparing energy, emissions, and operating cost. What you see on this screen is energy and operating energy and emissions. So the blue bars are energy comparison, and the green bars are emissions comparison. And you can see that electric resistance tank water heaters consume almost 3 times more energy compared to a conventional heat pump water heater. Whereas a gas tank technology consumes almost 4 times more. Like there are the emissions are 4 times more compared to heat pump water heaters. So heat pump water heaters have great potential, not just from energy efficiency perspective, but also decarbonization perspective. So what you see on this screen is emissions comparison with operating cost. So again, the green bars are emissions, and the orange and yellow lines are operating cost. The yellow line is for off-peak operating cost comparison, and then the orange line is for on-peak with on-peak rates. And this slide totally shows that an advanced grid connectivity and controls are very critical for the ideal operation of heat pump water heaters. So designers and installers need to really emphasize on the grid connectivity and controls aspect of heat pump water heaters in order to optimize its operation. Otherwise they can in fact cost more if it is not optimized. So from this slide onwards, I have a couple of slides talking about the Advanced Water Heating Initiative that an NBI is leading. It's a multi-year, it's a regional multi-year effort to increase production and adoption of heat pump water heaters. And the goal is to bring heat pump water heaters into the mainstream. It's a market transformation initiative, and it's in collaboration with Building Decarbonization Coalition. We are at the end of year one. It's a 3-year effort to begin with. Somehow the slides.
Amrita, just click into the window.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Connie. So what you see on this screen is market transformation pathway for the Advanced Water Heating Initiative. Not just in California. So this initiative started with California, and slowly now the Northwest. So it's like spread over the West Coast. And we have also started a similar initiative in Midwest now. So the initiative is growing, and so the scene is similar. So the share of heat pump water heaters is 2 to 3%. Energy Star, their recent sales like shipments data, they have seen a 15% jump in their in heat pump water heaters shipments overall and sales. But again, that is compared to like their last year's shipments data. But the overall sales in regionally is like 2 to 3% for heat pump water heaters, and this pathway emphasizes on next 10 years to make heat pump water heaters the mainstream. What you see in black line is the conventional efficiency water heater. So we want to see the share of conventional efficiency water heaters go down, and heat pump water heaters, high efficiency, low carbon heat pump water heaters share to go up. And I see the Advanced Water Heating Initiative, most of the products and the work that is done under Advanced Water Heating Initiative is focused on these 3 main categories. That is strategic planning and coordination, priming the market, and technology advancement and validation. Under priming the market, we have market development, market confidence building efforts going on. And under technology advancement and validation, we are working on the technology advancement and areas that I talked to you about: low GWP heat pump water heaters and 120 volt heat pump water heaters, which will help gas and propane advancement. So those kind of efforts are happening under technology advancement and validation. And we are doing that through like we have 4 working groups under the Advanced Water Heating Initiative, with having an initiative leadership, helping on planning, strategy, and we also have a 13-member steering committee. The 4 working groups are Unitary 240 volt working group, Unitary 120 volt working group, the Central Heat Pump Water Heater and Connectivity and Controls working group. And think about these working groups as different technologies. So for example, the Unitary 240 volt working group. So each technology is at different stage of adoption. So for example, the 240 volt, the units are in the market, and this this working group, which is led by representative from SMUD and Southern California Edison, is focusing on market development and market confidence building measures. Whereas the 120 volt, the unit is not in the market. What we have heard from manufacturers is the unit is getting factory tested now, and by early 2021 the units should be in the market. So they are facing unique challenges. So this particular working group is working on like market confidence building and development of the technology. So pilots, like field study developments, and that is led by Jim Lutz from Hot Water Research. Central Heat Pump Water Working Group is led by BPA, Bonneville Power Administration from Northwest. And they are, as I mentioned a few slides ago, they're focusing on this widget-like system design, package system design, so that there is quicker market adoption. Finally, the Connectivity and Controls Working Group, which is led by Jeff Wicks from NEA and representative from EPRI. And this working group, again, as I showed in a couple of slides ago, grid connectivity and controls are very critical for ideal operation and optimized operation of heat pump water heaters. So this working group is focusing on connectivity and controls related. So for example, CTA 2045, a command set development. So the good news is a demand management standard, which is JA13, recently got adopted in California's Title 24. So we are seeing some momentum overall in all these working groups and the work that is happening under the Advanced Water Heating Initiative. Finally, I am going to summarize this in three lines. So heat pump water heaters and these emerging technologies they support building decarbonization and electrification. Grid connected smart technologies integrated with renewables is critical for decarbonization. And these technologies are proven and in the market for decades now, and they can deliver on the decarbonization goal on equity as well as decarbonization and climate goals, keeping the equity lens in mind. Thank you all. With that, I guess I'm going to hand it over to Connie.
Okay, thanks everybody. That was wonderful. If you would like to turn on your cameras to my colleagues on the panel, we can go forward with the Q&A. Just for everybody's information, we will have a follow-up email that includes the slides and a link to the recording, and those will all be sent on Thursday. There will also be a certificate of completion for this session that comes with that follow-up email. So let's see here. Okay. So the first question, for carbon shedding or shaving, are there sources or links that list grid greenhouse gas emissions by day or hour, which you can share?
Yeah, I'll take this one. So yes, there are. There's an organization called Watt Time, WATTTIME, and they publish a live data set of marginal grid carbon. It's updated every 5 minutes, covers the entire country and actually internationally too. That's a pretty cool set. The different grid operators, like for example, the California ISO has some pretty cool resources on their website at caiso.com. Of course, here we are in Oregon, or some of us in other parts of the Northwest, but presumably it's relatively a local audience here. So you're maybe thinking more about how about here close to home. And I think a good resource for you might be a national one. It's the NREL, National Renewable Energy Lab Standard Scenarios. And that is a a data set that has both average and marginal carbon emissions, and I won't get into the details on what all that means. But average and marginal carbon hourly for now and every 2 years all the way out to 2050, and they do it either at the state level or at these sub-state grid balancing authority levels. There's about 150 of them across the country. They are just about to publish an update to that that's going to have a whole lot of cool data. It's not only the carbon, it's also the cost. So hourly cost projections and lots of different flavors of cost. That will be, it's called NREL Standard Scenarios. The 2020 version should be out inside of a month. But drop me a line if you want something for use before that comes out.
Okay. We have a question for Kathy. What gas technologies will be the most difficult to gain adoption for electric replacements? Is it location dependent?
If location means geographically, the answer is no. But regarding the technologies, I mean, if you move from in the commercial sector, it will be some gas boilers in existing buildings, just because of the physical constraints in the location. But those can be really a great opportunity to retrofit with heat pumps. In commercial, also restaurants, the advocacy for all electric restaurants is growing. There's some great resources through Frontier Energy in terms of the importance and the operational practices of commercial cooks. I think that they've gathered some great stories from cooks saying how pleasant it is to be in an all-electric kitchen after slaving in the heat and the sweat over a gas-fired cooktop. And of course, there's this relationship between the gas cooking in a restaurant and the cooling load. So there is very much win-win, but you've really got to get those chefs buy-in, which is happening slowly. Same thing residentially, stoves, tops are the one that's most emotional. I didn't mention in residential gas fireplaces. Again, more of an emotional connection, home and hearth kind of effect that is common in new construction. But there aren't any barriers, and they're not difficult to replace water heating if it's in new construction, or space heating in existing buildings, as Amruta, existing homes, as Amruta mentioned, retrofitting an existing gas boiler where there's not 240 or 220 amp of it, 220 power available. Then we've got to get these technologies ready. So the retrofit of water heating in existing homes is still challenging until these 120 volt systems are available.
Okay, thank you, Kathy. For Amruta, is the working group considering the role of solar water heaters? Why or why not?
So solar water heaters, yeah, I would say we did have conversations around solar thermal water heaters, and we have seen in California, and again, as I mentioned, this initiative started with California and then grew into West Coast. And in California, in one of the study that NREL came out for focusing on solar thermal, they have seen that solar thermal's efficiency totally depends on, so it depends on where climatically you are installing solar thermal water heaters and whether they are efficient enough and whether they're competitive to heat pump water heaters. And in California, they have seen that they are pretty, heat pump water heaters, grid connected heat pump water heaters are pretty competitive to solar thermal. We have also seen that with like solar thermal are expensive to install, also labor intensive, and we totally are tackling solar. No, I wouldn't say tackling. We do have solar thermal at the back of our minds and do have discussion around that, but not directly focusing on solar thermal, especially because of their current barriers with cost and installation. Installation extensive as well as cost expensive to install solar thermal.
I might just add that when you start looking at a building that is low energy and you're going to have photovoltaics, adding more photovoltaics and a heat pump water heater could be a superior solution to having either a conventional water heater or even heat pump water heater coupled with a solar thermal system. So by avoiding the installation and the maintenance of solar thermal, you can basically simplify and add more photovoltaics with a heat pump water heater and basically get the same or better efficiency.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Another question here for Alexi specifically. Considering the efficiency first strategy and noting that plug loads and miscellaneous electric loads include substantial waste as a constant, what consideration is there for new tech solutions to control power at the point of use, either socket or fuse spur?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked. Plug loads are really important, especially as we get to zero energy buildings and really high performance buildings. We've found that in quite a few zero energy buildings, plug loads and MELs, miscellaneous electrical loads, can account for maybe half of the building's energy use, right? Because you've now driven down the HVAC and the lighting and the other loads so far. We can take some of the examples that we've seen from our research into zero energy buildings, not necessarily those that were really thinking deeply about building grid integration, but that did try to reduce energy as much as possible and pull those over to the plug load side of things. So for example, one building, one of the largest zero energy buildings, and it's been there for several years, the National Renewable Energy Lab Research Support Facility in Golden, Colorado. It's a few hundred, 300,000-400,000 square feet. That building has these controllers on each workstation's power switch where you show up and you turn the thing on. I believe it just runs for 11 hours and then it turns back off. Very simple. You can go much more complicated, and there are, as the question kind of indicates, there are some pretty cool technologies coming out, pretty promising technologies to, for example, have a socket where the top switch is always hot and the bottom switch can be controlled through a network control, whether that's a schedule or something that's got grid integration. I think often the best or the most promising approaches are those that control lots of plugs within the building. For example, a lot of bottom plugs that are at workstations, say. So the top one's hot, the bottom one's got network power control. You plug your workstation into that bottom one. All of the workstations across the whole building are operated by a central controller that serves as one node to the grid, so that from the utility or the aggregator's perspective, it's seeing one thing, but that one thing has actually got lots of plugs controlled by it. So there are a couple of different interesting approaches coming out. There are also some that integrate with occupancy sensors, so the plugs are active when somebody's actually there. Kathy or Ralph, anything, or Amrita, anything you want to add to that little synopsis? Okay, yeah.
I mean, the only other thing I would add is that we recognize that as you drive down energy use in buildings, the unregulated loads, right, the plug loads and equipment that are not regulated by code become a substantial part of your total energy use. And so you have this, almost like 50-50 split on plug loads, unregulated loads and the those that are regulated. So, there is interest in trying to find ways to, drive down energy use of those unregulated loads and try and bring them kind of more into the fold with, the policies and voluntary efforts that we can do, as designers and builders of these buildings.
Great, thank you. Here's another question, maybe for everybody. Have you seen integrated high-performance water heaters installed in new heat pump water heaters installed in new multifamily construction? How do you deal with exhaust air? Leave it in the unit, route it to the common areas? Does fire code stand in the way to make this work?
I can take this one. The question specifically asked for smart, like grid connected heat pump water heaters, and I would answer it from single family perspective, because I have seen I've heard of those installed in single family application and not in multifamily applications yet. So regarding venting requirements, so heat pump water heaters do have venting requirements. They need 700 cubic feet of air in order to work, and they can do that through either having louvers on the doors or on the top of the room, or they can do it by adding vents. Yes, there are smart grid integrated heat pump water heaters that are installed in single family applications, and they do have venting requirements, and they can be achieved by adding louvers or vents. Did I answer Connie, was there like a two-fold question?
It looks like you, or it's how did you deal with the exhaust air? And I believe you.
Yes. It's just okay. So so heat pump water heaters, when they are heating water, it does cool. Because basically they pick up warmth from the surrounding air. So when they are actually working, it does cool the air a little bit. So they are. If the recommendation is to install heat pump water heaters in areas where there is waste heat. So for example, IT rooms, or close to the IT room, or dryer where there is waste heat, or HVAC rooms, and the efficiency will be better, and in fact those rooms will also get a bit cooler when the heat pump water heaters are activated or working.
Awesome. All right, another question. Thanks, Amrita. How long does it take to offset the embodied carbon of retrofits, and what can be done with all of these old units?
I guess maybe I can start on that one. You know, the embodied carbon of a retrofit, it varies. And I think what we're finding is with this new focus, you know, so there's a lot of people are now focusing activities on embodied carbon and studying that. So with, for instance, the EC3 tool, and evaluating what the opportunities are for reducing embodied carbon, what is being found is that just simple specification can reduce embodied carbon by, say, 30% or more at no additional cost, and then it goes deeper from there. In terms of how long it takes to kind of recover, you know, the embodied carbon in a new construction or a major renovation, you know, I guess the question is compared to what? So that the time that, you know, I think what we're finding is as we think about, you know, zero energy buildings, you know, much of the carbon impact is related to the embodied carbon materials, because the operating carbon is reduced, you know, nearly potentially to zero. So you know, the amount of carbon that is you know, included in a renovation of a building, I'd say from the beginning, you know, you'd want to take a look at how you could reduce based upon specification, and then, you know, if you're achieving zero energy, that you'll quickly recover that embodied carbon because of the energy savings compared to, let's say, a conventional building or a code building. So I don't know if any of the other panelists would like to address that question.
I'd just chime in and say that since we're talking about retrofits, the fundamental kind of rule about retrofitting is, you know, keep the building if at all possible. There's your embodied. The energy is really in the materials production and the shell and physique of the building, the envelope. And if we are looking to electrify, usually it's hard to make the case to electrify a perfectly good heating system. These are trigger points when something's already having a failure, and that change out would be occurring probably like for like, and that's our intervention opportunity. When that boiler is failing or the HVAC rooftop units need to be replaced, you're going to get improvements in efficiency, reduced carbon, far beyond the quote waste of the equipment that's coming out that would be coming out anyway. And then also refrigerant upgrades, if you're changing from a lower efficiency heat pump to a higher efficiency, is significant. So I think those are some of the fundamentals.
Great, thank you. This is a very hyper-local question. Alexi, last night on KGW, they talked about the Boardman coal power plant shutting down and said that this summer there is a chance for a 25% chance of brownouts for Portlanders. Is there anything the common energy-aware consumer can do in their home to reduce peak energy without a big retrofit?
Sure. Yeah, actually, I have gained a little bit of notoriety at home because I'm always trying to get us to run the dishwasher later, not at 6, 7 p.m., but more like 10 or midnight, more like midnight. But that's a relatively minor thing. So if you can shift loads off of peak during peak hours, that's helpful. And there are some programs. I know Ralph and I text about this sometimes. He gets these peak time rebate things. I happen to be in Maine, so my utility doesn't do that.
I get that.
But a few of us on the call here are in PGE's peak time rebate program, where you basically can save a kind of a surprising amount of money for shifting load. It's not hundreds of dollars, but it is, you know, $1 a day or something that you actually do it. Ralph, maybe you can describe what that's like. I would just say briefly that if you're not talking about doing any kind of retrofit or project, if you are, you know, a heat pump water heater, for example, I put one in my own basement. It wasn't too bad as a DIY project. Just took an afternoon. That's an energy efficiency measure, and it's going to reduce the peaks all the time. Even if it's not a grid connected water heater, it still uses 1/3 the energy or so. But then in terms of shifting loads, you know, if you can run things not during the peak, which in the summer is probably what, 3 p.m. to 8 p.m., something like that, my guess.
Yeah, so
morning.
Yeah. Alexi, I would just say, you know, PGE does have that program. Basically, you get a notification the day before that there's going to be a peak time event that they will be providing some rebates for. And, you know, at our house, and I think the question is could everyone do this, right? Could every customer take some kind of action? And so it basically runs from 5 to 8 p.m. And at that time, basically we try and turn everything off. We don't allow the air conditioner to come on if it's a very hot day, and we will, you know, if we would need air conditioning, we wait until 8 p.m. for that. You know, we try and avoid the appliances, like you're saying, like no clothes drying. You know, we're using a clothesline. We're waiting to do the dishwasher at like 1 in the morning or even the next day. And so, you know, there's a lot we can do. And so, you know, I think what we've seen is when those events happen and they call on customers, they are able to drop that peak. So the potential's there. I think, you know, even without the utility controlling our equipment, you know, the appliances. But when we get to a point where we're actually controlling, where we're, you know, kind of controlling electric vehicle charging and air conditioning systems and the other appliances, you know, we can handle this. I think, you know, we should be preparing for that eventuality, which might come, you know, next summer.
I just wanted to add a couple of things. So for example, even I am in the enrolled in the PGE's demand response program, and when you get the notifications and when the event is actually happening, the user has can override. So if you change the thermostat, and then you are out of particularly for those hours you are not saving anymore because you started using energy. So just make sure that you are not changing any settings in order to help the utilities. And it's not that they are controlling your thermostats or the household. You have the ability to override their commands. And I also wanted to add regarding the first question that came in asking about Northwest marginal emissions and where to get that information. BPA does have on their website, they have like hourly marginal information for Northwest particularly, which I would say align with most of the utilities in the Northwest.
Great, thank you. And we have one more question that has come in for Alexi. For a traditional market rate multifamily developer, what is the benefit of building grid integration? Are these buildings valued higher at sale? Also, are local utilities interested in promoting building grid integration, and are they incentivizing it?
So I think about building grid integration as an enabling technology. If we're going to decarbonize our grid, oddly speaking, then we need buildings to play their part in being able to tune, to some extent, their energy consumption to what's going on the grid. More renewable, more wind, more solar. As we get to having more wind and solar on the grid, as the grid mix changes, the costs that the utilities see are going to change, and the patterns that drive their rate making, their rate cases to regulators are going to change. The end result of that is that in the end, the rates will also change. So having a building, and the wheels of rate making grind slow, so it won't happen overnight. But in the end, rate structures, time of use rates, demand charges, things like this are coming. They're evolving, and they're shifting toward more variability and more focus on peaks. So in terms of just raw financial sense, having a building that is less peaky and more flexible is more future-proofed, is more, you're mitigating your risk when you're talking about those rate changes that we know are coming. There's the risk mitigation side. There's also being able to play in utility demand response programs, so you can try to get incentives and assistance there. In terms of construction incentives here very locally, that's a good question. On the market rate multifamily side, I would assume so. I'm not deeply aware of what exactly the program offerings might be here. I'd be surprised if there weren't any. I know PGE has done a few different DR programs over the years, and they've gotten they've gone deeper into that. So I am confident that there are some PGE programs that apply to market rate multifamily for demand response capacity and for building grid integration, but I don't know the specifics.
Alexi, we did have somebody chime in and say, yes, PGE has a program that directly pays building owners and operators for building integration. Multifamily water heater program is a great example.
Great,
So,
thank you.
And I can just add an example for California. I was for this heat pump water heater analysis, I was just diving deeper into the rate structures in California and why grid integration is so critical for smart heat pump water heaters. So a utility in California for the peak charge is 40 cents per kW, whereas the off-peak charge is 16 cents per kW. So if you're not really optimizing your operation, then you're paying almost 3 times more in your electricity bills. So and if there are no incentive programs offered by utilities, just from your utility bill perspective, it makes sense to optimize these smart technologies.
Yeah, and a building with a lower bottom line is worth more.
Mm-hmm.
Great, everybody. Thank you so much for your time on this presentation. We are just at about 10:30. So I am going to close this out. Don't forget to visit Sustainable Building Week's website for more events for the rest of this week. And as I said, all of the follow-up materials for this session will be sent to you on Thursday. Thank you, everybody. It was a great presentation.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for joining.
Take care.
Thank you.